La Asamblea escuchará un discurso.
The Assembly will hear an address by the Prime Minister, Minister of Defence, Economic Growth and Job Creation of Jamaica. His Excellency Andrew Holness. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency? I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of Jamaica and invite him to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, I extend heartiest congratulations on your election as President of this 74th session of the General Assembly and assure you of Jamaica's full support in the work ahead. I must also convey our deepest appreciation to Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces for so ably guiding our work in the preceding session. Mr. President, the United Nations is a critical tool for building a world of peace, security, and development. These are the hallmarks of multilateral collaborative activities of which we can all be justly proud. No individual country can fulfill the development aspirations of its people without working in partnership with others. We are grateful, therefore, to the Secretary General and his team, and all who have been the drivers behind many successful UN initiatives. At the same time, our global space is facing unprecedented risks. These include deepening geopolitical conflicts, heightened trade tensions, terrorist attacks, and security threats. There is also growing religious intolerance, increasing xenophobic behavior, and not least of all, the devastating effects of climate change. Sadly, we are witnessing these phenomena against the background of fears of a global recession. I therefore very much welcome the theme chosen for this session of the General Assembly: galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. Now is indeed the time to redirect our focus and enable our countries to reverse these negative trends. Mr. President, Jamaica is pursuing several policy and legislative measures designed to create a more cohesive society and a more resilient economy. Our major goals are the promotion of inclusive, sustainable growth, economic opportunities, peaceful society, social harmony, and citizen security. We are working to make this a reality for every Jamaican. Greater investment in human capital will undoubtedly yield exponential returns for national development. Empowerment of our people will facilitate participation in the growth and development of Jamaica, our region, as well as the wider international community. Special attention must be given to the most vulnerable in the society to ensure that no one is left behind. We have therefore increased the budgetary allocation to the Jamaica Social Protection Strategy, which encompasses wider social and income security imperatives associated with a range of vulnerabilities. In 2017, we revised our national poverty reduction program, aiming to reduce the national prevalence of poverty to below 10% by 2030. We are working to ensure that persons living with disabilities, the elderly, women, children, and young people are part of an inclusive, resilient, and prosperous society. We have made significant advances with universal enrollment at the pre-primary, primary, and secondary levels of education through a strategic and integrated program of education and training. As part of this endeavor, we are increasing emphasis on science, innovation, and technology, and we are committed to creating a labor force adaptable to the new and emerging demands of the global workplace. We also launched the Housing Opportunity, Production and Employment Program, HOPE, which enables unattached young people to access training in life skills, character development, and employment. Over the last 3 years, more than 26,000 young people have benefited from the program and have become ambassadors of HOPE. In addition to cutting youth unemployment in half over the last 3 years, Jamaica has achieved a record low unemployment rate of 7.8%, 18 consecutive quarters of economic growth, low and stable inflation, and a reduction in our debt to GDP ratio from 147% to 95%. Mr. President, I've shared these indicators of Jamaica's steady economic performance, while fully acknowledging that the successes are not solely dependent on a strengthened domestic fiscal responsibility framework, but also on an enabling global economic and financial environment. Jamaica is determined to achieve economic independence and social equity, working collaboratively with our bilateral and multilateral partners. Mr. President, a major challenge for Jamaica is crime and security, particularly in terms of its impact on our economic development goals. Despite the strong programs that are in place to get the guns off the street, our investments in improved border control systems and other forms of security investments, we do not by ourselves have the capacity to stem the flow of illegal trafficking in arms. The malignant link between organized crime, the illegal drug trade, and the illicit proliferation and trafficking of small arms require transnational, regional, and multilateral action. We therefore not only rely on the support of our neighboring countries, but we look to the UN to continue to play a pivotal role in supporting peace and security at all levels, including with respect to the proliferation of conventional weapons. The growing geopolitical challenges and risks of global economic instability are of concern. The situation is easily worrisome for small developing countries like ourselves that are already susceptible to external shocks. Instability and insecurity affect foreign direct investment and have implications for GDP growth, revenue, employment, and public spending. Yesterday's high-level dialogue on financing for development, as well as the high-level summit on the SDGs, reminds us of the pressing need for us to mobilize increased capital. Sustained progress is not achievable without the requisite quantity and quality of public and private investment to close the financing gap for climate action and SDG implementations. It is for this reason that Jamaica and Canada continue to spearhead initiatives through the UN Group of Friends for SDG financing and continue working with partners such as Denmark in closing the Investment Gap Initiative to attract greater investment in sustainable infrastructure. Jamaica also welcomes India's offer to establish and host a coalition of disaster-resilient infrastructure to provide a framework to ensure that all future infrastructure is resilient in the face of disasters. We encourage coordination and cohesion among the efforts now emerging so that the strongest impact may result from our efforts. I'm also compelled to reiterate the special challenges faced by highly indebted middle-income countries like Jamaica and our Caribbean neighbors. Although poised for economic transition, our potential is seriously constrained by having to choose between high external debt repayment and catalytic growth spending. Furthermore, the current policies that govern access to concessional financing windows do not allow us to access sufficient, affordable, long-term financing for SDG investments, and our capacity to mobilize public resources domestically is limited by our small size and vulnerability. This touches on the issue of graduation criteria, which do not take account of the range of vulnerabilities facing middle-income countries. Our economies face further challenges from de-risking and the attendant problems of the loss of correspondent banking relations, which severely impede access to essential financial services. In the context of our special vulnerabilities, my delegation welcomes the midterm review of the Samoa Pathway, which represents an opportunity to further operationalize its mandate. Jamaica is committed to this process and looks forward to the full support of the international community in this regard. Mr. President, I am pleased to advise this Assembly that Jamaica successfully implemented on the 1st of January this year a ban on the importation, manufacture, and distribution of single-use plastic bags, expanded polystyrene, and plastic drinking straws. The ban has served to sensitize the general public to the environmental challenges posed by non-biodegradable litter, especially those that end up in our oceans. We are considering expanding the ban, even as we make it a priority to strengthen our waste management systems. This year, we also launched a national tree planting initiative through which we will plant over 3 million trees in 3 years, representing 1 tree for every Jamaican citizen. We remain committed to the reduction of the erosion of watersheds and the attendant impact on coastal ecosystems. We are partnering with others to ensure that our marine environment, on which our socio-economic survival depends, is being sustainably utilized and managed. The high-level panel on the sustainable ocean economy, convened by Prime Minister Solberg, and its resulting call to action and reports on the oceans as a tool for combating climate change, enjoy the full support of Jamaica. We look forward to the convening of the Oceans Conference next month in Norway and in Portugal in June 2020. Mr. President, that brings me to the single most visible threat facing the global environment, which is climate change. Its effects are intensifying, with coastal cities and low-lying island nations facing greatest risk. The recent devastation wrought by Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas reinforces this reality. We are deeply saddened by the tragic loss of lives and the extensive damage to property, infrastructure, and livelihood occasioned by this climate disaster. Jamaica and other Caribbean islands have first-hand experience of this increase in intensity of hurricanes, as well as intermittent increased rainfall and extended periods of drought. These adverse weather events have resulted in major economic loss and dislocation across the region. Jamaica has adopted several policies and legislative measures to reduce our vulnerability to natural hazards and to adapt to the impacts of climate change. This includes the development of a comprehensive and first of its kind public financial disaster risk monetary policy with provisions for financial risk protection, including budgetary contingency funds and state contingent debt instruments. More action is needed at the national and global levels to urgently tackle climate change. I was honored, therefore, by Secretary General Guterres' mandate to jointly lead with France and Qatar the climate finance and carbon pricing track at the recently concluded UN Climate Summit. The success of these efforts for climate action will require adequate financing and transformative and scalable programs. I look forward to building on the outcomes of the summit and the decisions to be made at COP25 in Santiago later this year. Mr. President, this is a seminal year for the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea as we commemorate the 25th year of its entry into force, as well as the 25th anniversary of the International Seabed Authority, headquartered in Jamaica. The ISA's contribution to the development of this Constitution of the Ocean and its continued relevance to the preservation of this global common resource is worthy of commendation. We look forward to the successful conclusion in 2020 of the negotiations of an international treaty under the Convention to substantially use and conserve marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Mr. President, Jamaica maintains an abiding faith in the value of multilateralism. Every member state has a role to play in confronting the challenges that beset the global community. This is what continues to inspire countries like Jamaica to contribute its professional and technical expertise to the multilateral process, including at the Council of the International Maritime Organization, as well as the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea in 2020. We are committed to supporting the fulfillment of our common objectives in both institutions. Mr. President, the United Nations Charter commits the international community to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and conflicts of all kinds. Jamaica, therefore, supports the Secretary General and the special envoys in Western Sahara, Syria, and Myanmar. We also support the efforts towards rapprochement on the Korean Peninsula and discourage any action that would reverse those efforts. Additionally, we remain conscious of persistent tensions in the Middle East and Africa, where the attainment of peace and security has been far too elusive. Coming closer home, we further reiterate the call for the discontinuation of economic, commercial, and financial embargo on our neighbor, Cuba. We are equally concerned about the disarmament and proliferation landscape, particularly the gradual dismantling of long-standing disarmament treaties and the implications for international peace and security. We cannot ignore ongoing conflicts in countries like Yemen, Afghanistan, and Libya, where UN personnel continue to provide human peacekeeping service. We commend their dedicated efforts and respectfully recall the memory of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice to advance the United Nations ideal of global peace and security. This includes our own Jamaican national, Mr. Clive Peck, who lost his life in service of the UN as a result of a bombing that occurred in Benghazi, Libya, a few weeks ago. We thank the Secretary General and the UN for the support that it has provided to his family in this time of bereavement. Mr. President, as a global family of nations, our collective commitment to the rules-based international order must remain steadfast. Sustainable development for all is attainable only through concerted effort and partnership. To that end, we must act decisively and expeditiously. This 74th session of the General Assembly represents a crossroads for decision-making and action. Let us not waver in our determination to make this a reality. Mr. President, I thank you.
باسم الجمعية العامة أود أن أشكر.
In the name of the General Assembly, I would like to thank His Excellency Andrew Holness, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense and Economic Growth and Employment of Jamaica for his statement, and I would like to ask the protocol to accompany His Excellency.